Let's generate together our motivation for why we're here, why we want to share the Dharma together. We generate our intention to want to listen to the teachings of the Dharma, follow the path so that we can develop our qualities to help every being get out of his own suffering.
Dagi chushe gibe sonam ki drola pinchre sange drupare sho sange chedan soge chonam la chancho pardo dani kyapso chi dagi jinso gibe sonam ki drola pinchre Sange drupare sho sange chedan tsogi chonam la chancho pardo dani kyapso chi dagi chinso gibe sonam ki drola pinchire sange drupare sho.
In the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha I take refuge until enlightenment. With the practice of generosity and the other perfections, may I obtain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Hello. Once, this is an anecdote that happened to me, and I've told this story many times, and now I'll tell it once more. There are some moments in life where things happen that really touch us, and we're marked by that. I was in Tibet. I was going to my master, Kachin Losam Punsuk Rinpoche, the abbot of Tashilumpo Monastery. Tashilumpo is one of the most important original monasteries of Tibet. It still is an important monastery. So it was very early in the morning. It was just before dawn, and I was on my way to receive teachings. And as I was going to his room, and he was in the old room where the abbots of past centuries were. So there's this tradition. Even the bed is the same. I mean, 400-year-old bed, and from one master, one abbot after the other. And every time I would go there, I would feel a very special emotion. I received many teachings from him. So it's more or less on the fourth floor, and in Tibet, I don't know why, but from one floor to the next, the stairs are more like ladders, not 90 degrees, but about 70 degrees. I mean, basically, you need also a kind of rope to help you up. Even in new homes, often. And as I was going up, I found this young monk in front of me, maybe about 20 years old, and he had um, a, a, about a 25-liter container full of water on his back that he was carrying up. Um, we were near Shigatse, about 4,000 meters. And even if he was born there, he was a little bit out of breath, from one floor to the next. But he let me go by. I could see that it was tiring for him, and he was bringing water for his master and those who live there used for drinking, for cooking, and then it would be poured into a different kind of container with a tap. But in the courtyard below, there was a, a there was a tap, and so I asked myself, why not bring running water into the house, at least for the abbot? Um, you know, you don't need great technology to do something like that. And they have incredible technologies there. They've restructured the main temple of the monastery, and there were antique frescoes, and they came to take away the old ones. Then they redid the walls, restructured the walls, and then put back the old frescoes. So I asked, after the teachings, I allowed myself to ask the abbot. I said, Genla, why not bring a tube of water up? And he said, I'm not going to get into technical aspects of it. And I talked to another friend about the technical things. But he said the reason why we keep it like this is because if the kids, if if the if the people, since they're young, don't learn to have constancy and put effort into basic things, how, when they're older, how are they going to maintain any kind of constancy or put effort into more difficult things and less essential things like meditation? And that made me think about it. And then, and then, and then actually, I talked to someone else too about the technical parts, and they said that this monastery, um, um, that we can't allow ourselves to put running water into this structure that is 600, 700 years old, that is protected culturally, as the heritage of the place. So if the tube were to break, it would be devastating. So in fact, even in the monastery now, if anything breaks or anything needs to be restructured, they can't they can't use any they can't use anything that wasn't used in the originally. Um, this aside, the point is we're made up of habits. And in our modern times, what we're losing more and more is this habit of working hard. Or am I wrong? We live in a time where there's this idea that to be happy, we need to apply this rule of minimum effort and maximum comfort. The, the less effort that I need to put into something and the more comfortable I can be, the happier I'll be. I mean, if that were true, great. The problem is that at a certain point, we we find ourselves in front of things in life, whether either we put effort and constancy or nothing happens. From the diet, for example, a simple diet. I mean, though you don't need to raise your hands, but how many of you have started a diet in the past and then didn't finish it? Once I did a diet, I followed a diet. It was really, really beneficial to me, but it was a 6-month diet. And then after those 6 months, without thinking about it too much, I started eating a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and then before I knew it, I wasn't following that diet anymore. So it becomes difficult for us in these times in which we live to take it and maintain constancy where especially there's where we have to work hard. And there are extremes and extremes. For example, I see here in Italy a certain generation, for example, in those in the past who are used to work. They cut a finger, then they just keep on working. Even the Tibetans are like this. Once there was a monk here, Abu. He was here in the center. At a certain point, he said, I have a stomach ache. So we gave him something for a stomach ache. After a few hours, my stomach's really hurting. And about about going to sleep, he said, "I'm going to go sleep somewhere else because I don't want to disturb you because I'm making sounds from the pain that I'm feeling." At a certain point, about 1 o'clock in the morning, he had a cold sweat and he was in a lot of pain. They called someone. Gabriella was here. I was in Milan. She saw him and she called an ambulance. The ambulance and then came and then they called me from the hospital. They needed to talk to him because he didn't speak neither English nor Italian, and he was having he had he has appendicitis totally open, and he had emergency surgery, and another half an hour he would have died. That's another extreme. So one who needs to work, it doesn't matter how much one has to work, how much pain one is in, or maybe, oh, my tooth hurts, I have a toothache, I'm just gonna leave it. The pain instead. I mean, this is an alarm that's ringing to tell us something needs to be done. I mean, it should be, we should listen to pain. But what my point here is that our tendency is is so we go from one extreme to the other. So one extreme is it doesn't matter how hard you have to work, don't complain, you just do it. Or the other extreme is working hard is the worst thing that we can think of. But to change our habits, it's tiresome and it requires constancy. And what I see is that one point that we need to remember that we should try to cultivate more than anything else is our ability to have constancy in what is good for us but not easy. Because we have access to information. We have access to information today much more than in the past. If you look at Buddhism specifically, we have an enormous quantity of books that have been translated, translations, videos. We can travel. We can go and find any master of any tradition. If we want to follow to Japanese tradition, the Tibetan tradition, do we want the Theravada tradition of Sri Lanka or Thailand, or work only on mindfulness? And often, when there's too many choices, one gets confused. But my point is, we have access to an enormous amount of information, and we have a level of comfort that is without precedence. If we look at previous generations, our parents, our grandparents, our great grandparents, were they as comfortable as us? If you look at the middle-aged kings, they were worse off than we are. So we have many wonderful conditions. We have conditions, for example, we've created many things to have more free time. We have a dishwasher, we have a washing machine. You don't need to hand wash clothes or wash your dishes. Everything's fast and clean. The vacuum cleaner, but also to go from one place to another. We have a comfortable car to talk to someone. You just send a chat or you call quickly. Everything to do things faster and faster. But what we're missing is constancy in what is beneficial, what is good for us, but what is not easy. This is fundamental. And it's just a side note here. A few years ago, I saw a documentary of Ladakh. And in this documentary, there was an interview with a lady who lived in the fields there in the middle of the mountains, and she had a sister who lived in the city at the time. At a certain point, this lady, the farmer, she said, "I don't understand. You know, Here in the countryside, if I need to cook, I need to go out and collect wood. I need to walk to the other part of the valley to get water from the river. I need to make a fire. I need to prepare everything. There's a long process for cooking. And if I want to talk to someone, you have to go down the mountains. You have to go to the other mountain, go to the nearby village, and then you talk to that person instead. If I go and see my sister in the city, she to cook, she just turns something and the fire comes out, and you turn something else and water comes out. You pick something up and you can talk to somebody. But what I don't understand is that when my sister comes here, we have all the time to do everything we want. Instead, when I go there to her, she never has any time for me. So we do many, many things to have more time, but somehow, in the end, it's what is missing most. Or am I wrong? Often when we talk about meditation, we say if someone really wanted to really seriously transform one's mind and have concentration and transform and develop oneself, one needs time. Then the answer is, oh, well, with everything I have to do, you have no idea the life I live. Oh, I mean, but I ask myself, do you go to work in your pajamas? Do you have time in the morning to get dressed, to read the news, to look at Facebook, to take a shower? It's a question of priority. It's a question of choice. So it's fundamental for us to see how we can create time to manage our time. So quickly, let's go back to the beginning, or we talked about yesterday. What is it that I want? What is a priority for me? And getting back to this point, I wanted to read you this passage of this book that someone gave me, and it's called the Path of Man from a Hebrew tradition. It's quite beautiful. Comes from a conference in 1947 in the United States. So it's the opening. And Herman Hesse wrote a few lines and dedication. It's a short book, and at a certain point, so this shows us also that the same things are said even from different spiritual traditions, from different times. But if one looks at oneself with a certain amount of sincerity, attention, and also level of awareness, very often we touch on the same ideas. So here it says, man needs to realize, first of all, for himself, that conflicts with others are only consequences of conflicts present in his own soul. And so he needs to put effort into overcoming his own inner conflicts to then be able to go to others as a transformed man, and by relating with them, transform also them. That's the crossroads we were talking about yesterday. I want to change the world, or do I want to change the way I relate to the world? And later on it says, start with yourself. Here is the only thing that matters. In this very instant, I shouldn't worry about anything else in the world but this beginning. Any other position will take me away from this goal, and then I would completely fail. So, so I can lift up the world. I can lift up the world by transforming myself. But I have 2 points of to hold up. When we see, yes, it's true that I need to change something in myself. It's true, but someone else needs to change. I know that I should be doing it, but what about someone else? Then it's just finished for us. Instead, we take away our own responsibility, and then we take away the attention from the only real thing that we can do. I'll just give you one last passage that still has to do with motivation, which will be our next step. So ask yourself this one question: What? Why? Why? Why look inside? Why start my personal path? Why? And here's the answer. Not for myself. So even if we said before, start with yourself. Yes, you start with yourself, but you don't end with yourself. You are your starting point, but you are not your objective. Know yourself, but don't worry about yourself. So the question I ask myself, that we should ask ourselves: what do I want? Do I want to change the world, or do I want to change the way I look to the world? I'm sure that all of us, the first to the last, we have conflictual things in our lives, people, situations, um, on the small and big problems, micro and macro. But the question we ask ourselves, instead of judging others, the question is, what can I do about this? What aspect of mine creates conflict, without blaming ourselves? Oh, I'm the one who created this conflict. No. Why do I live this situation in in a suffering way? What can I do myself to better myself? And why do I want to better myself? Because I want to be a positive interdependence in the world that I live. I want to hold up others. I want to do this not just for myself. And in front of this, the question that comes is, what can I do? What should I do? And if I recognize clearly that my starting point is my own behavior, the way I interact physically, verbally, and mentally with the world, as we said, this interaction brings change, then I need to transform my way of acting, of speaking, thinking in a virtuous way, avoid negative um, um, actions and do virtuous actions. And here I wanted to add a technique that I think is very important within everything that we're doing here. Yesterday we looked mostly at the preparation for meditation, is silence, on meditation on our breath, which is very important. And something I'd like to add that we've seen. It's a key that might be a little bit different from what we're used to seeing, understanding. We have this tendency often of thinking that keeping the mind on one point of meditation should be done with a certain amount of tension, forcing the mind to stay. Instead, what works much better is that we rest our mind on the object of meditation. The state of meditation is not is not a state of tension or we're forcing the mind to do something. We instead need to let our mind rest on the object. So the technique that we saw at the beginning, simply allowing ourselves to be, well, we're not actually meditating, we're just allowing ourselves to stay still. That I invite you to do this for longer periods, and you'll see that what will probably happen, we're all a little bit different, but the tendency is that after a little bit of time, once we're still, one finds some physical comfort within, and the mind is free. Then the mind will just go everywhere. But at a certain point, the mind will be tired of going round and round. And at that point, we can give our mind a place where it can rest. And that can be our breath or another object. But observing our breath is possible. And we're not forcing our mind to do something, but we are offering our mind a place where it can rest. Is this difference clear? And if we allow to go beyond this phase where the mind is agitated, oh, I have nothing to see, I have nothing to do, and get past that crisis of abstinence, you know, because we're used to stimuli, we're addicted to stimuli, and the mind will be looking for things to grasp. But once you get past that tension of looking for something, at a certain point, the mind gets tired and relaxes, and we offer a place where the mind can rest. Creating this familiarity, this habit, little by little, this allows us to direct our mind on different objects of meditation, as we saw yesterday. Patience or generosity, gratitude, the preciousness of this life, impermanence, etc., etc. But this takes me to an important point. Sometimes people say to me, look, Lama, I have been following Buddhist teachings for years and years. I'm tired of hearing that anger is not good and jealousy is not good and here and there. I've understood. But when it comes, it comes. It's understanding is not that useful. It's just the first step. Understanding is the first step. And once I've understood, then we need to apply two important passages because we have a division into of three parts. If we talk the Buddhist teachings, the path is divided into three parts. There's view, conduct, and then familiarization, meditation. The view is where I understand something, where I study, I read, I learn, I take on a path of acquisition of information and conviction of that understanding. So in this process, I listen, but I also understand. So there's listening and also understanding. So it's no longer just something that I've been told, but it becomes my own certainty. This is the part of the view which is very important. No one will ever be able to meditate on patience if we are convinced that anger is good for us. So it's important. For example, I always use the example of anger because it's the easiest to analyze and look at. Other emotions are a little bit more difficult. So I understand that anger is not beneficial. This is part of the view, and instead our conduct, the part of conduct is how I interact in my daily life. How do I speak? How I eat? How I interact with people? How I live my daily life? And then there's the part of familiarization. Let's take a different example to try to simplify a little bit. I need to go on a diet. The first phase of the diet is the view. I go to the dietitian or my friend or the doctor. I read a book. And at a certain point, I I get information. The doctor, the friend, or whoever tells me for your body type, you shouldn't eat this, you should eat that, for this, that, and the other reason. The more understanding I have of that diet, the 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 reason behind understanding those types of foods, my body type, the more I understand that, the better I'll be able to the better I'll be able to follow the diet, and this is part of the view. So I get to a point where I follow the diet because I'm convinced that these things are good for me and these other things are not. Once I've done that, then there's the part of conduct in my everyday life. What do? I don't eat this, and I don't eat this and I eat these other things. I don't buy this and I buy these other things. I try to follow the diet. But in the end, it's a diet that sometimes I'm able to follow easily. But when I'm at my auntie's house for dinner, or I mean, how can I follow? If she makes a great lasagna, how can I not eat it? She does it, she cooks it, she prepares it with so much affection. This is a recipe that's been handed down from generation to generation. So I know that when I'm there, it'll be very difficult to follow that diet. And so that's where meditation comes into play. As long as I'm in a certain context, I'm able to follow the diet, but there are other situations that are more difficult. So what am I going to do? Before um, finding myself, before I find myself at my auntie's house, um, then then I sit down, I bring myself to the present moment, and I do an analytical meditation. I review the part of the view. I review the part of the view, what the diet is, why it's good for me, and then I take that conclusion, that conviction that this diet is good for me and anything else would be bad, and then I imagine the situation. There I am. I see my auntie there, who um, says, oh, who this kind of threatens me. Oh, if you don't eat, and you, what kind of world do we live in? If there's no family, if you don't eat this, maybe she invents a whole story. If you don't eat what I prepared with so much love, then you shouldn't even come to dinner, you know. So just emotionally, you know, and also we really love this dish. So then our mind says, oh, well, I shouldn't just think of myself. Look at my auntie. I really should just eat this. So one goes round and round in the mind and in the mind. And then you have together also this desire to do that thing. When that mind says, okay, I should eat this, then we go back to our conclusion of the view, and then we find a way to peacefully not eat that. Say, I love you, Zia, but in this moment I'm taking care of my health. Find a way to not eat it. If I'm able to do this in visualization for 10, 15, 30 times, when I will actually be at my Zia's house, it's not sure that we won't be able to eat it. Maybe she has some kind of tactic that would convince us that we hadn't thought of, but there's a much higher probability that we'd be able to keep our diet, maintain our diet. So the part of our conduct, for example, when we look at anger, that part of meditation, is some very important that is often underestimated. or because we have this wrong idea that it's enough to understand, or that knowing is enough. But when we're in front of a situation, what pushes us in our way of acting or reacting to that situation is not our understanding, but our own experience. The, it's the way that we've lived in the past, how we've seen others react, how we have reacted ourselves. I have had a personal experience that shocked me, with myself. For my nature, I mean, I have other things don't that aren't that aren't good. Laziness, for example. But luckily, as a child, since childhood, lack of patience or aggression, that's never been a problem for me. One day, I was with someone who, for the umpteenth time, was doing something that was really harmful to himself and to others. And I had tried so many times to explain kindly and with affection, why wasn't the right way to behave. And that time we were alone, and I said to myself, I've tried to do it calmly. Let's see what happens. Okay, let's see. Let's see if a little bit of theater will change the situation. I we were in the car. Actually, I raised my voice. I, 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 I bashed my hands on the steering wheel, and it worked. It worked. That person said, "Oh, you're absolutely right," but then after a while, I find myself in the exact same situation. And I thought, okay, it worked before, so let's try again. But this time, and so I did it again, but it wasn't as hard as the first time. I mean, the first time it was pure theater, but I wasn't used to it at all, to raise my voice and show that I was angry. That second time it was easier, and time later, the same thing happened again, and I was just about to react in the same way without even thinking about it, and I was able to stop before that, and I thought, no, never again. But because it's not my nature to react with aggression. The first time it was completely artificial, and the second time it was artificial, but it was coming easier, and then that third time it was coming spontaneously. So, for that, when we find ourselves in front of a situation, we have this tendency to follow, the habits of the past, the things that worked in the past. But the good news is that when we imagine something in our mind, it's as if we have lived that thing. So when I sit down and I imagine a situation where normally I act in a certain way, and I allow myself to react in a different way because I'm not in a difficult situation. I'm here with myself. I'm in a protected space, and I'm able to act differently than how I normally would. I act with patience, calm, and respect instead of anger and aggression. I'm able to act with compassion instead of indifference in front of the suffering of someone else. I'm able to show respect instead of indifference, etc., etc. I'm able to act in a virtuous way instead of falling back to my negative habits. In visualization, obviously, once is not enough. We need to repeat it many times. When we're able to do that, we familiarize ourselves with the antidote. We familiarize ourselves with patience, with generosity, with love, all of these characteristics. Through this process of inducing that feeling, and then when we find ourselves in that actual situation, we have a reference point. Is this clear? This said, meditation is something important if we recognize that there's something inside that we want to change or something that we want to cultivate to better generosity, etc. For example, there are many practices that we use. The generosity comes up again and again as a visualization. It's said that generosity comes from the mind, not in that physical action. If inside I have this act of sharing, then it will show up merely, but it's born within this in non-indifference to others, this joy of sharing with others. We imagine it, we visualize it, and then it will manifest itself materially. And this is very important too. The other part, and what I wanted to add briefly, is the fact that in conduct, in our behavior, it's not from one day to the next that we're able to change our habits. And we have habits from childhood, from birth. Uh, we do things that we learned from the context in which we were raised. I don't know what's ever happened to you that um, you've that you judge your negatively your parents' behavior and then realize that you have the exact same behavior because we learn from them. Without someone telling us openly. I mean, they learned from their social, the context in which they were raised. And here, there's an exercise that we should do, not in meditation, but in conduct, to how to face our negative habits, jealousy, anger, envy, the critical mind, the critical speech. This is a very important point for me. There are two vows, and in mid-September we have 2 days where we'll talk about the vows. These the vows for mind training is beautiful. There's a practice called Lojong mind training. It's a practice to train the mind in love and wisdom, and there are 7 points, and then these last points are is advice and vows, and there within there are two vows that I really like. One says, "Don't talk about the missing qualities of others." In other words, don't criticize others. I have this. I see, it seems to me that often people are there with the rifle ready to shoot. Or we talk about someone's quality, and then we hear people say, yeah, but instead, this vow says, I shouldn't criticize others. I don't want to criticize others. And then the following vows says, with is the next vow is mind your own business, basically. Literally, the translation is don't think don't think about anything that don't think about anything that has to do with others, which doesn't mean don't think about the needs of others, but it means fill your mind, don't fill your mind with other people's business. In other words, what color underwear you wear, I don't need to know. I don't know what you need. I don't need to know what you've done here and with this person, that person. I need to know what your needs are and how I can help you. That, yes. But I don't need to know the business of your life. These are two vows that exist within this Lojong training. So many habits that we have in criticizing and complaining, these are national sports that we really need to be careful of, because the more we criticize, the more we complain, then the more dissatisfied I am, and the more dissatisfied I will be. Let's remember something. The antidote to dissatisfaction is not obtaining the object of desire. We, in our spontaneous way, we think that to eliminate dissatisfaction, we need to get our object of desire. So the antidote for dissatisfaction instead is not getting what we want. The real antidote to dissatisfaction is is valuing what we have. Is that difference clear? The antidote to dissatisfaction is giving value to what you have and not trying to get what you want. Because I mean, dissatisfaction is is a whole a black hole. No matter what you put in, it'll never fill up. So the question is, in my daily life, how can I face these habits that come out, that the anger that comes up, envy, jealousy, this mind of criticism and dissatisfaction? Because I've understood. I need to understand a little bit more. It's important to cultivate on the view. I'll try to meditate on it, but in the meantime, here's my is in the meantime, there's my daily life and many situations, not just my auntie with the lasagna or the parmigiana. So here, there's a passage that in the Lojong teachings that's called is to cultivate the three difficulties. Cultivate the three difficulties. These are three attitudes that are difficult but should be cultivated. The first difficulty that we should train in, cultivate, or train is the term used in Tibetan, is in self awareness of our own emotions and actions. If I take a vow to not criticize, so the first difficulty is being aware of ourselves when we are actually criticizing. And what's interesting, sometimes people have come to me and said, Lama, it was better when I didn't know, because now I'm aware that I shouldn't get angry, I shouldn't criticize, that these things are harmful. But I see that it's coming out, and not only am I not able to not feel these things, but then I'm angry with myself. But when we're able to see that negative attitude that arises and manifests in our speech and in our actions, we're in that first phase, that first difficulty, having awareness, seeing. We're not able to control it. We're not able to stop it. We're not able to change our behavior, but we're able to see it. And when one is in that situation, one should rejoice for taking that first step. That second difficulty, the second step that follows, I see. After a while, after a little bit of awareness, we're then able to recognize that conditioning, not when it has totally overwhelmed us, but when it's starting to come out. And because at the beginning of the awareness, at that first step, we only become aware only once it has taken over us. And the more awareness we have, the more we're able to see that inner reaction as it's about to arise, as it's starting to come out. It doesn't just happen like that. It's gradual, even if it seems quickly, but it is still gradual. So the more awareness we have, the more we're able to see what um, um, what makes it come out. And in that second phase, there we realize that that reaction, that behavior that we have, first of all, is impermanent. Or rather, I mean, no one has ever gotten angry and stayed angry his entire life. Imagine you get angry and you're just trapped in that emotion for the rest of your life. It doesn't happen. I think many of us, it's happened. Maybe it's happened to have a very strong negative emotion, or losing patience, or have had a strong reaction. You don't need to answer. I imagine the answer is yes, that it's happened to all of us. But no matter how, no matter no matter how much you exploded or how you reacted, after a while that feeling passed. I've seen people where this state lasted for 3 days, went to sleep like that, woke up like that again, but sooner or later that feeling passes. This is a very important point in all of this. So, what happens, that second attitude, is when I'm able to recognize that emotion, that habit is coming out, I don't block it. I don't try to stop it, because if I try to stop it, it will just overwhelm me. It will stampede me. It's stronger than I am. And I don't follow it either. I try to not feed it. How do I not follow it? And also here there are three levels. And we start with the first and we go to the third. The first level of not following a habit or reaction, an inner reaction or negative a negative conditioning, is to not follow it physically. I'm not going to interact with others. I'm not going to take decisions or interact physically taken by that feeling. I feel anger. Anger is there, but I'm not going to allow myself to interact physically through this anger. I'm not going to do things guided by this anger. Because what happens is when we materialize that emotion, that habit, physically, we reinforce that habit. The more I do something, the easier it becomes. The second level, I don't follow that I don't follow that feeling verbally. I don't do it. I don't follow physically nor verbally. I bite my tongue. I say something else. I do something else. I don't allow myself to be mixed up in that negativity verbally. And the third level, I don't interact with that habit, with that emotion on a mental level. I don't go into an inner dialogue with that emotion. For example, anger comes out towards something, and I don't go into think, oh yeah, I know I shouldn't get angry, but did you see what happened? I mean, who would ever be able to not get angry in such a situation? Okay, so we don't go into this inner dialogue of justifying or victimizing ourselves, because what we do in our inner dialogues, often we justify our emotions. We don't block it and we don't follow it. We just look at it. We remember this is just a habit. I'm not going to nourish it. I'm not going to feed it. I'm going to wait for it to go by, and we stay in a neutral state, what faced with that emotion, that habit, and we see that after a while it passes. I don't know if you've ever realized in the meditations in these days, for example, there's a moment where one wants to maybe scratch an itch or move. What's happened if I have a sensation, a feeling that then and one doesn't do anything? It feels at first it feels like it increases, it gets worse, but then it passes. And it's the same thing with envy and fear and jealousy and anger. So it arises. We don't follow it. We don't nourish it. Like a wave that comes, I just stand back and I watch it go by. If, if we use the analogy of the wave, what's the best way to face to face a wave? Um, you know, we 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 is to is just to try to go above the wave and go up with the wave and then go down, and if we try to go face it, it will just take us and toss us around. The third difficulty is to give continuity to the second, because what happens and what will happen is we're able to not block an emotion, not follow it, but at a certain point we we become less vigilant. We put our guard down, and then we're overwhelmed again by our negative conditionings. But if we're so we should be able from we need to give continuity to this until we're able to see that emotion arise and pass, and to distance ourselves a little bit, become observers of the experience. And something that helps us a lot is finding a safe place inside our breath, a mantra, it could be an image. In that moment, we let that go by and we put our attention somewhere else. And after a while, we'll be able to be in our safe place while the emotion goes by. And every time we're able to do that, that habit, it comes, it arises, manifests itself, and it ends, that process ends weaker than as it started. And all habits are like this. The more I repeat something, the stronger that habit becomes. The less I repeat it, the weaker it becomes. A little bit like, when we want something, at the beginning, it seems like we can't be without that thing. And then after a while that we don't have that thing, we just get used to it. It's like that. So we have our view, conduct, and meditation. If we're able to unite these 3 points, I can assure you that we will be able to make marvelous changes, even in places we couldn't even imagine. But let's remember that we need a certain continuity, constancy. And we get back always to this question, why do we do this? We need to generate a good motivation, try to understand why we do what we do. So to conclude this part, this passage of this book, the book says, what do I want? I don't want to put the responsibility onto others. I want to recognize within what aspects, where I can change myself. Also because it's the only thing I can actually do. The only real place where we can do something is with ourselves. And it's by transforming ourselves that we can transform the world and transforming those around us. We agree on this? Because the only way I can change someone else is by interacting with them, and I interact based on what I am. Now, trying to organize a little bit my ideas, because there's still a lot that I'd like to see, that I'd like to share. On the basis of meditation, single-pointed meditation, or in silence, what we've seen, there's a lot to work on, and I prepared something, a little gift for everyone. If 2 people can come up to help distribute. I prepared this little gift for everyone. I asked Alor to print it. It's a kind of, they're good wishes for your meditation path. It's a small representation of that image that we looked at before, that shows the meditation path to reach the state of perfect concentration of shamatha, and the good wishes, hoping that in the future we can go into more details, because getting into more details about meditation without experience, it stays too conceptual. It's about talking about somewhere where we've never been, Instead, if to do things seriously, we should start from from the basis that we've seen in these days, do some experience, and then we can get into more details so that we can take the next steps. And in this case, these are the 9 points for the development of meditative um, concentration. If you look at the drawing, you see the practitioner here represented by the monk, and he's running behind the elephant and the monkey. They represent his own mind. The monkey is the mind, is the mental agitation of the mind, and the elephant represents the part of the mind that has the foggy mindedness. And so when one wants to begin to meditate, which is like most of us, we're here at the beginning of this path. So we sit down to meditate, but instead we're just running behind our mind. It's not that our mind. So they've been representing this for centuries. So this should console us a little bit. So this is, we hear, oh, in these days it's too difficult. If I lived in Tibet in this, centuries past, it'd be easier. No, it was like that then too. So at the beginning, here we are running after our mind, and when we try to concentrate, we're distracted by our senses. Here you can see the objects of the senses represented. There's a conch that represents smell. Even from the time of India, they would put the perfume there, and then we have sound represented by those two discs, those two symbols, and then there's also on the third curve at the left you see the fruit, so that's for taste, and then above we have cloth for touch, and then we have a mirror, so we have smell, sound, taste, touch, and form. So these are the objects of our 5 senses. Why? Because as we become more, we get into a deeper, we become more concentrated, and we're addicted to some objects. The ones that are strongest is the ones of our sight. So that's the last one, is the mirror. Here you can see that mirror is a little golden and blue in the center. And then just before that we have touch. So when we're in meditation, we have there's the feeling of the body and touch. So we're strongly attached and easily distracted by touch. And then we also have sound and taste, and then very beginning smell. As we go up, we should be able gradually to calm our mind from the attachment to these objects of our senses, because our mind is so used to being stimulated by our senses that when one sits down in meditation, the mind starts looking for these objects. I think it's happened to everyone, where you've closed your eyes, you put your hands on if you put the palms of your hands on your eyes, it becomes like total darkness. And then what do we see? I mean, do we see total darkness, or do we see dots of light? what is that? What are those little dots of lights? Are they lights that are really there? No. It's the eye that is so used to having light. It's the memory of light. It's looking for other stimulation. So our senses are so used to it. Just to give you an idea, this is my way of thinking anyway. I've seen that when we see, a part of what we see is our projection of the future. Let me explain myself better. Our brain works not just in a passive way, but also in an active way. So they did this study in the 1970s. They realized that when there are two lights that are intermittent with a certain frequency, the perception, the visual perception, it's as if the light went from one part to the other. But in reality, they're just 2 points of light. One goes on, one goes off with a certain frequency. But it's as if the perception is that the light goes from one to the other. And they did it with a red light and a blue light. And what happens is, to our eyes, it appears as if the red light went towards to the other and transformed into blue, and then the blue comes and transforms into red. So they realized with this study that the brain actually it was prepares the brain prepares itself. It foresees the change of color and it imagines it. But the light is never in the middle of the two lights, but we see it as if it were between the two lights. So we have this tendency when we see something that happens, there's a part that is what arrives, is the signals that arrive to our senses, but there's a part in the milliseconds before we we foresee what is going to happen. This is a natural way that we have in neuroscience. There are many studies. There are many studies that of our perception. All of this to say that our senses are used to being constantly stimulated. So when we sit down and we don't give attention to our senses and we try to concentrate in just one point and we leave our senses, I mean, we need time to pacify this, to pacify these our senses. So up to halfway on the path, I little by little I need to allow my senses to calm down, to not be looking for some sensory object. Even in the first curve, you see there's some fire. It's greater at the bottom, and as we go up, the fire should become smaller and smaller. It's not really like that in this drawing, but it should be like that. So the fire diminishes. The fire represents effort that one needs to put in to being concentrated in meditation. At the beginning, one needs to put in a lot more effort, but as one goes on, and as that addiction to the sensory objects subsides, the less effort one needs to put in. And this is represented by the fire that's diminishing. I don't know if you really see, but in the hand of the monk, you can see a rope with a kind of hook and a kind of stick. Those represent the awareness of the meditation object and the awareness of what I'm doing. This was translated as the kind of he's saying it's the mindfulness. I'm present in what I'm doing. This ability to see what I'm doing with awareness, and this ability to observe oneself. So not only am I resting Not only do I have one object of meditation, but my mind is watching where I'm going. It's mindful recollection and vigilance. And we go on. At a certain point, as you see, up above, it's the monkey and the elephant are above. After the second curve, again, when one is able to no longer be prey to one's own senses, then or slave of one's senses, one is in front of the elephant. You see, at a certain point, the elephant is attached to the rope. That's when the mind is able, through through the memory of the object of meditation. There's less mental agitation. The monkey's following, and the elephant is following too. Is more calm, and above the elephant at a certain point there's a rabbit that represents, in this case, the subtle mental foggy mindedness. There's coarse foggy mindedness, but then there's also a subtle foggy mindedness, mental torpor. And shows also we need to be careful. I've seen many times people learn to meditate at a certain point. It's so pleasurable to stay without mental agitation, that the objective of meditation is a relaxed state where that mind doesn't have that inner dialogue, and then being in that state becomes the final objective of the meditation. It's pleasurable and relaxing, but actually one is in a state of mental torpor, of foggy mindedness. It's pleasurable, it's not something bad, but it's not what we want. What we want instead is the ability to familiarize our mind with different states of consciousness. I remember in 1993, 1994, when I was in Dharamsala, listening to teachings from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. There were different people who lived in the mountain huts, and they had come down, and I don't remember that much, but I do remember that someone who said, "Be careful. I'm talking to His Holiness had said, to those who spend your life meditating, be careful, because you can spend years and years meditating and only familiarizing yourself with mental torpor, because in mental foggy mindedness the object of meditation is not there. Let's choose, I mean, the object of meditation is there, but there's fog. The mind is half asleep, and one stays in that fogginess. And instead, when we meditate, there should be clarity, more and more clarity of the object. And here, that's represented. Here, once the practitioner has the elephant on a rope, and the elephant follows, he doesn't have to pull the elephant, and then he doesn't have to pull the elephant anymore. He just follows him well. Then the monkey is completely gone, disappears. And then when he gets to that point, if you see in the top left, there's a fruit tree. It's a little bit difficult to see, but there's also a little monkey in the tree. I know it's there, but I don't see it here in this drawing. Maybe if you see the bigger drawing, you can recognize but we've done this for children as well, and instead of the symbols, we made a radio, and so there was a version for children. It's wonderful. It's very cute. Anyway, And there you could see the monkey well. What is that? What does the monkey represent? In the monkey in the fruit tree means one starts to familiarize oneself. Um, when one starts to really familiarize oneself with meditation, one can develop attachment to that meditative state, that bliss. One doesn't want to do anything else but be in that state. And this this is the monkey is that active mind. So here it says even after one has developed this after one has after one knows how to meditate well, one needs to pick the fruit, need to interact correctly to and not just stay attached to the meditative state. And then you can see that the practitioner walks without pulling the elephant. It's not even attached by a cord. The mind just follows. It's calm, pacific, peaceful. The monkey's not there. There's the rabbit is gone too, so there's no mental torpor. At a certain point, the elephant becomes totally white and sits down together with the practitioner. This is the development of inner calm and peace, where there's total harmony between the body and the mind. One is able to rest truly in the object of meditation and just being present in the object of meditation single pointedly without mental foggy mindedness or agitation brings pleasure to the body and mind. And once there's that, one can familiarize oneself with any object, and this is represented by the practitioner mounting the elephant and flying in the sky on a rainbow. And at the very top, there's also the practitioner after who first he's flying with that's the bliss of body, the bliss of body and mind that comes from the flexibility of body and mind that brings the bliss. And then he's seated on the elephant, and in his right hand he has he has a sword, and this is the next phase of meditation where we now unite the meditative state with the wisdom of analysis of the final ultimate nature of phenomenon. So the sword is wisdom, the correct view of reality that can, and there's also the fire that can burn the ignorance. This is the next phase of the meditation called special insights, or vipassana in Sanskrit, lakton in Tibetan. So the object of meditation is not the breath or whatever, but it's actually the ultimate nature of phenomenon. It's the view that it opposes our ignorance. On just a side note here to explain this, for those, it's a seed for those who don't know, and more information for those who already know. This is not what I wanted to talk about today, but given that we're here, I think it's auspicious to open this topic. Why do we suffer? Because the world is terrible, or because we relate in an unhealthy way? In the end, because we relate in an unhealthy way, you know, and we're many who relate in an unhealthy way, and then we could say that the world is bad. But it's not about which came first, the chicken or the egg. Here clearly we understand what came first. Why do I interact in an unhealthy way? Because I interact based on jealousy, dissatisfaction, anger. where do these ways of of come from? They come from this obsession of self-gratification, this obsession with the I and the my. It's our inability to see others. We relate constantly through what I want, as I want it, when I want it, how I want it. This is the primary cause of our suffering and all the conflicts that we see in the world, from environmental problems to economic problems to wars and to family fights. Where do they all come from? They come from this obsession with self um, 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 gratification, our inability to see others beyond our own needs and what our own desires. Where does that come from? We're not going to get into too many details. We could spend absolutely hours here. It's a subject that I really love to talk about and to analyze. But where does this obsession for self-gratification come from? It comes from our ignorance. Ignorance in Sanskrit is called avidya. Avidya, literally, a is a negation, a negative particle, and vid means to see in Sanskrit. Even Latin, videre, comes from Sanskrit vid, vedere. So avidya is to not see. This is the concept of ignorance. And there are two types of ignorance that are described: not seeing and the ignorance of seeing erroneously. At the basis of our suffering, there are two types of ignorance. There's the ignorance of not seeing, where we, in this present moment, we're not able to see what the causes that generate the results that we're living, and we're not able to connect this present moment with all of the interactions that brought the things to be the way they are. Together with the ignorance, we don't see the relationship that there is between what we're doing and the result that will eventually come. It's the ignorance of karma, of the law of cause and effect. We're not able to see this relationship. This is a gross level of ignorance, but the ignorance that creates selfishness, which is at the basis of all suffering, is the ignorance where we see reality, including ourselves, everything that we perceive, we see it in an inconsistent way, a way that's inconsistent with reality. Let me explain myself better. The example we gave yesterday, we take the color of this ribbon. I gave you this example the other day. What color is it? It's red. And we ask why it's red. I mean, it's red because it's red. There's not much to say about it. And 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 we shouldn't try to philosophize when I ask you this. Our natural, spontaneous way of seeing things, how do we perceive it? We perceive it. Do we perceive it as red because it's red, or it's red because there's a whole interaction, the molecules that form that object, and then when it when the light touches this object, reflects back to our senses and our sense powers, and to which we identify and give it a name. Or no, sincerely, uh, the color, do we connect it with something? I mean, this the I mean, the color red, we connect it with things. Politics, for example. Now, with without getting into, you know, red, for example, has been connected to many things over centuries. What about Red Square in Moscow? You know, you know. Because long time ago, the colors weren't so accessible, and one of the hardest colors to make was the red. And at a certain point in history, in and a little bit different in Asia, but in the West, for example, at a certain point, in Russia as well, when something was colored, to say something was colored, it was red. And it was a symbol of beauty and power, because to have things that were dyed, um, colored was a sign of power and beauty. So red square is like the beautiful square. So when we see something, we give meaning to it. That's what I mean to say. But the crazy thing is, when I see an object, this object doesn't exist to me in an autonomous way, but it appears as if it is. Let me just explain to help us understand. Every time we perceive anything, there's a process that is mostly, I say mostly because it's not in every case, but it's most of the time a process of 3 plus 1, 2. Uh, um, we, so 3 about contact and 1 is discernment. For example, the sound. I touch the singing bowl without analyzing, without philosophizing. If we were to ask ourselves, do we all hear the sound of the singing bowl? The answer is yes. Are we listening to the same singing bowl? Yes. Are we listening to the same sound? Yes. If you turn to the person next to you and ask, did you hear the singing bowl? The answer is yes. But now let's analyze a little bit. What happens? I touch with the stick the singing bowl, and this singing bowl generates a vibration in the air. That vibration in the air is that's our sensory object called sound that comes into contact with our sense power. Our sense power is our physical hearing. Our sense power is 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 perceived by our sense consciousness, that part of our mind, our brain, that interprets the signals that get to that physical part of us and interpret those vibrations. That's contact. So when I see something, we have what's this? The this when I see something, I see the light, our sense power, our eyes, and then the sense, the consciousness is the part of the mind that says, okay, you have received these colors and these forms when we see something. So so the hearing perceives vibrations and form and colors, so their eyes. And then we have touch and our smell and taste. But there are always these 3 parts: the sense object, the sense power, and the sense consciousness. When you do anesthesia, for example, you cut that link between the sense power and the sense consciousness. So if I cut myself with a knife, it would hurt. That the the sense object is there, it, but but the sense power is there, our nerves that perceive that pain, but I cut the connection with our mind that sense consciousness can no longer perceive. And at that point, it's as if it wasn't there. In the same way, if there's a sense, if I block my sense power, then I'm not able to perceive the sense object. So we need these 3 parts of contact: sense object, sense power, and sense consciousness. Now, beyond these, when we make a noise and we listen to this noise, or when we see an object, Does it just end there, or do we attribute a name to it? Not only do we give a name to it, but together with that name, we attribute meaning, function, characteristics, um, and expectations. We give it a whole meaning, colors, forms, sounds, everything we give meaning to, and we call this discernment. To say, I see this red ribbon, I can think at the ignorance because we use this when we do certain practices where we put it as a blindfold representing our ignorance that doesn't allow us to see reality as it is. That's why this ribbon is here. Or you can connect it to to your own data bank. And when that sense consciousness perceives an object, it does inner research and says, what corresponds to that? And says the most similar says, oh, it's like this, and gives it that name. That's how we work. So let's see again, but this time let's analyze. So the vibration in the air from the singing bowl that comes to my ear, is it the same as the vibrations that come to your ears? We're in different positions, different parts of the room, so the vibration also reverberates differently within this room. And imagine you're at home, or if you have headphones on or not. I mean, how the sound moves around. So the sense object that I perceive, and what I perceive and the one you all perceive is the same, or is it different? It's similar, but remember that which is similar by definition is different. So is different. And the sense power of each one of us, is it the same or is it different? Our hearing, do we all perceive the frequencies in the same identical way? Absolutely not. Our sense consciousness is the same, or will that be different too? Also, because here, let me just give you a simple example. Our hearing perceives certain sounds based on experiences that we've had since we were children. In certain languages, for example, there are certain differences in sounds, and if you didn't hear those as a child, then you won't be able to perceive them as an adult. Just thinking of the Tibetan alphabet, cha, ka 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 nga, cha 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 na. At the beginning, it sounds absolutely the same, but between, one is ka and then ka. I mean, I'm just forcing a little bit, but our our sense consciousness is based on experiences that that we had even as children that maybe we don't even. So the sense consciousness is different, of each one of us is different, and the value that we give to the sound of the singing bowl, is that going to be the same or different? It could be similar, but it is different. So with this awareness, I ask you, are we listening to the same sound? Absolutely no, not. And no matter how much you try to explain me the sound that you heard, I'll never be able to hear it as you did. So what we see is apparently the same. I mean, you can see me, and if you ask your person next to you, do you see Lama? The answer would be yes. But 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 the Lama that you see, is it the same Lama that I see? Because what's there? There's a sense object, the light that comes to our eyes. It's similar but different. There's a sense power. It's similar but different. Sense consciousness, similar but different. And the value that we attribute to it, I don't even know if that's similar. That's certainly different, possibly a little bit similar. But what I see what I see, is it the same as what you see? But what I see, is it what is there, or just what I'm seeing? Let's add something else. So we we see that the reality that we perceive in every moment appears to us in as if it were objective. I mean, how does it appear to us? Objective or subjective? The sound of this singing bowl, does it seem like it's the same for everyone, or does it seems that it's different for everyone? No, it seems as if it's the same. When we see someone, we expect that person we expect that person to live that experience in the same way that we do. You know, there was a time in my life. Luckily, it's much better. But there was a time when I wasn't able to go barefoot. I couldn't go anywhere cold, and every time I would see someone barefoot or with thin socks, I would think, oh, poor guy, poor guy. Um, we have this tendency of judging others as if they were us. If I see something, I expect you to see the same, or the reality appears to us as if it were objective. We we think that we're seeing what is there, not what we're seeing. So our ignorance, this is not the ignorance of not seeing, it's the ignorance of seeing erroneously. We see that which is subjective as if it were objective. So our ignorance is that we perceive a subjective reality. It appears to us as being objective, and we grasp at this reality as if it were objective. In other words, we relate to a subjective reality as if it were objective. The other aspect that we can unite to this, that's part of the whole. You can see this also in physics. If you like to see also from a different perspective, when I had COVID and I was at home a little bit, and I had some more time to read, I read a wonderful book written in Italian by Carlo Rovelli, and it's called Helgoland, and talks about quantum physics. And there's a whole chapter, really beautiful, that talks about Nagarjuna and in Buddhism. It's really beautiful. If you'd like to deepen this argument from a different perspective. So not only do we live in a subjective reality that appears to us as being objective, and we relate to it and grasp at it as it being objective. When we relate to any object, we see that object as if it existed individually, separate, autonomous, or in its complexity and interactions of itself. I mean, talk about a person, for example. We see someone, we see a person, and when we see this person, we think we're seeing a person, and we try to understand this person, and we don't have the awareness that this person in that instant is as he is in relation to everything else. And if we just look on the physical, if we look at physics, there's no atom, there's no particle of anything on the macro of the universe to the micro of the micro particles. There is nothing that exists as it is independently of the interactions, of its interactions. We get back to the rule that we talked about before. Where there's interaction, there's change. So if I'm interacting with you, and you and you and you and you, you're transforming me, and I'm transforming you because we're interacting. So what I am is not autonomous and detached from all the rest. That's clear, right? But when we see someone, we see something, the reality that we appears to us. Um, do we see this? D- does it seem autonomous and independent, or does it seem as it is mutually dependent and interdependent? Now, things appear to us as being um, independent instead of interdependent. This is another aspect of our ignorance. No, our reality is interdependent. Nothing exists autonomously, and yet it appears to us as if it were autonomous, and we relate with this reality as if it were autonomous and objective. Another part, sorry, this is just a subject that I really love, and it just takes me a little bit. Another point, just to conclude, let's take an example. Let's take a book. Here I have this book in my hand. What's a book? Okay, we need to analyze, to philosophize a little bit. What is a book in the end? What are the parts that compose a book? Pages. But if I have it in my cell phone, is it still a book? Oh, it's a digital book. But it's a book. So what makes up a book other than the pages? Words. So if I take all the words and I just mix them up, is it still a book? So what's a book? Words put in a certain order, chapters, every part of the book. A book also has a cover, and it needs to be a book. For it to be a book, needs to be bound, because if I take all of these pages and I scatter them around, is it still a book? So what are the parts that make up a book? We've got pages, we have paper, we have the ink, we have words, we have chapters, the binding, the cover. We can say that the book is the union of all of these parts. But the book, actually, if we go to see, the book is nothing other than a concept, a name. It's a name, book, that brings with it characteristics and functions that are attributed to to a whole of parts. Cover, pages, words. Because if I take this same physical object and I take it or give it to someone, someone who doesn't have this concept of book in his mind, this object can be, you know what? I can use this to heat to heat in the winter, or maybe it's going to help me balance the table that's not straight. In Tibetan Buddhism, this bell is one of the most holy objects that that one of the most holy objects that exists. But if you use it in the office as a paperweight, I mean, what is this object? We all agree that it's a bell, right? But what makes it a bell? It has its parts, but it has a name, has a function that is attributed to it. Why isn't it a cup? Can it sustain the functions of a cup? Yeah, it'd be quite it feels nice in my hand, you know. Not great to leave it around because you can't put it down. But I've seen in the airport, they're actually little cone cups, so you can't just leave them on the table. But if from today I say this is no longer a bell, this is a cup, what would happen? We would say, Okay, that's a cup. But how would we perceive it? Is it the bell that is being used as a cup? I mean, how do we see it? Or we see it as a bell, a bell that's being used as a cup and not just as a cup, because it's a bell. It appears to us as if it intrinsically were a bell, but in reality, it's nothing other than the the um the union of parts to which we attribute a meaning. For example, it's happened to me that I've gone to modern art museums and I ask myself, where's the art? And see something that for one has great meaning and for someone else not able to understand. Uh, what's the difference? It's just the value that one attributes it. Okay, why a banana attached, taped to the wall, it can have a value to one and not to another for the value of imputation. It's all there. Because if I take any object, this ribbon, for example, if I start describing this to you and I start telling you that this this ribbon was used by Lama Ganchen in many, many special occasions, and it had been used by his master in many retreats. And I give you, I'm just inventing. I don't really know where this ribbon comes from, but I used it the other day. But this the value changes. I mean, the way we relate now with the ribbon, it changes, doesn't it? So even in economy, what determines the price of something? The, the offer um, and supply and demand. And based on how many people want that product and based on how available it is. So money, for example, I mean, what what determines that? What determines printed paper having value? A group of people, a large group of people, attribute a certain amount of value to that thing, and then that thing takes on that value. So, what I mean to say, my point is that anything we perceive, it doesn't exist independently from its own parts, and it doesn't exist independently from the value that is given to it. And what puts the parts together and creates a whole is the name that is given, the observer. So when we say that reality appears to us as if it were objective, autonomous, and intrinsic, or rather, it appears to us as if it existed independently from the observer, and that what I see is what is, and everyone should be able to see in the same way, as if what I see and perceive exists autonomously and independently of all the interactions, and as if it existed independently of the value that is given to it. Is that clear? Now, maybe someone would ask me, what does this have to do with meditation? Two examples. Think, think of an object of anger and an object of desire. Try to imagine an object of anger and an object of desire, regardless of what it is. We can do many practices to diminish our anger, to face our anger, to not get angry anymore, and we can do it. We can manage. It works. But as long as that object of anger appears to us and we relate to it as if it were an object of anger intrinsically, then we need to be very careful. If we're not careful, that anger will come back. But if I asked you, if that object of anger is an object of anger because I've attributed that value to it, or because it is actually intrinsically, objectively, and in an object of anger. An object of desire is an object of anger because it's good intrinsically, or because I attribute this value to it. Philosophizing, we would say, because I attribute that value, but when desire comes out, what does desire tell us? Oh, it's good because it's good. So, at the basis of all of our emotions like anger, jealousy, and envy, sadness, fear, the object of perception of that emotion is lived as if it existed objectively, autonomously, intrinsically. And if you deconstruct this autonomousness of it, then that emotion cannot sustain itself anymore. It falls apart. There's enormous difference between seeing the bell as a cup and seeing a cup. There's an enormous difference. Like, I can take an object of anger as an opportunity for spiritual growth, or I can just see directly my opportunity for spiritual growth. I don't know if this is all clear. With this, we get to the last point. Our mind, what happens? At the basis of our suffering, there's ignorance where we relate to reality in a way that is inconsistent. And we can open up other doors to explain why, but it's not the right time for this. It's a long topic. But there's just one last thing I wanted to bring. It's just quite simple, but very important. Our mind has a very special characteristic trait, which is where we're not able to perceive, to see at the same time two things that are directly opposite each other, two opposing things. An example, a simple example I've always said, I've always given, we're not able to think, I like water and I don't like water at the same time. I mean, just try to think, I like water, I don't like water in the exact same moment. Are you able? Are we able to think, I like the temperature but not the taste? Sure. But those are two different things. Temperature is one thing, taste is another. Maybe this of the same object, but two different things. So our mind is not able to have two ideas that are directly opposite at the same time, based on the same object. Is that clear? Have you ever tried to eliminate a thought? Oh, I shouldn't think of this, I shouldn't think of that. Does that work? No. What should we do to eliminate a thought? We can generate an opposite thought. I mean, that's the only real way to do that. I'm not going to focus and put my energy into I shouldn't think of this, I think of this. No, we generate the opposite. And we touched on this briefly before, and in Buddhism, this is very important. We talk a lot about the antidote and the poison. This is the antidote is directly opposite the poison. So the way to change a certain behavior or way of seeing things is generating the opposite. Our ignorance, how does it manifest? In seeing erroneously or in not seeing the nature of things. I don't see that reality is interdependent and subjective, or do I see it as being objective? It's not that I hear the bell, the singing bell, and I think, oh, the sound of the bell is not interdependent. No, our our thought is no, the sound is that, and you should hear what I'm hearing. So our ignorance is it's an affirmation. Our ignorance affirms something that is not there. Our ignorance affirms not that the sound is not there. It it's not that it affirms reality and reality is not there. It affirms an autonomous, independent, objective reality that doesn't exist, that is not. And to eliminate that mind of affirmation and this autonomous, objective, independent reality, I need to generate the mind that is completely opposite, because once if I say, oh, that sound is interdependent, it interacts with everything else and exists based on the value attributed to it. It's subjective based on the name given by the observer. I help the process, but I don't eliminate completely that erroneous mind. It's like if I have the mind that says I don't like water, no matter how much I tell myself water is so good for me and it tastes so good, no matter that I'm not going to eliminate that mind that says I don't like water. So wisdom understood as that state of mind that is directly opposite our ignorance at its root. The root of our suffering is the mind that perceives directly that the object that appears as being of intrinsic existence is not of intrinsic existence. It lacks intrinsic existence. It's a negation. So let's make a simple diagram here. We have our object. Imagine we have an object, whatever it is, the sound, a flower, with a flower. So on one side we write is. On the other side we write is not. And underneath we say intrinsic existence, objective, um, autonomous. So the flower is of intrinsic, objective existence. This is how reality appears to us. This is our ignorance. Wisdom, where is it? The flower is not as it appears of in objective, intrinsic existence, and difference between the only difference between them is one affirms and one negates. Because why this? Because our objective is to eliminate a state that then that generates all the negative all the suffering. All of this is represented by the sword that the monks hold. So the sword is the discernment, is this wisdom of discernment, knowing how to see things in a certain way that sees that reality appears as if it were intrinsically existence. But remember that reality should not be seen in a general way, but in every specific thing. The sound of the bell, my own mind, this specific person, everything that appears to me, it appears to me as being as if it existed intrinsically, autonomously, and this word, and this is all understood in the word in in the term intrinsic in and of itself. It's like sides of the same crystal, and wisdom realizes that it's just not like this. And this is what we call shunyata in Sanskrit. Maybe you've heard this term emptiness. All phenomenon are empty. The nature of all phenomenon is emptiness. It's not just empty. Empty of what? It's empty of what? Of intrinsic existence, objective, autonomous existence. So meditating on emptiness, which is our final objective, means we're not meditating that nothing exists. First, I do my analytical part. I understand why and how things are interdependent, subjective. not in an intrinsic, autonomous way. What we talked about very superficially now here. I relax my mind. I let an object appear to my mind. I let that object come as it normally appears, as being objective and of intrinsic existence. And as that mind arises, then I need to apply my antidote. So I am not negating the existence of this object, but it appears to me as being of intrinsic existence, and it's not. So I negate that. And when I'm able to negate that intrinsic existence and block that way of perceiving reality, then I go into the state of negation of the intrinsic existence of reality, and my object of meditation becomes the simple negation of the intrinsic existence, which is the actual definition of emptiness. The mere negation of the object. It's this simple non-existence of the object of negation is the definition of emptiness. All of this to say, just to touch on the fact that sitting down to breathe and allowing oneself to be still has a final goal in Buddhism, to help us familiarize ourselves, invert our deeper habit that is that takes us, that pushes us to relate to reality in an inconsistent way. Our final objective is to change our paradigm to not understand just conceptually but spontaneously that everything is subjective and interdependent. Everything is connected to everything else, and consequently then we have a sincere deep feeling of altruism that brings love and patience, and as important result of the understanding of emptiness is a deep state of harmony with oneself and every phenomenon, every other thing. So I wanted to open up a window a little bit, given that we were looking at this drawing. Here we are at our starting point. I don't know, maybe someone is halfway there, or if someone's already arrived. Maybe you've all arrived and you're just here to help me along my path. Everything's possible. But at least at this level of explanation, we're here at the starting point. But it's important to look up high and say, what's up there? See what's up there. Understand that we don't want to meditate simply to relax our mind, but we want to meditate to overcome the root of our suffering. Not just of this life, but for all lives. Because when one makes a change on a deeper level, not just conceptually, this is taken from life to life. It's not just about understanding, it's about transforming ourselves deeply. And with this, we have a general panoramic view. And I leave this as a little gift, and also as something auspicious, hoping that in the future we can explain it with more details. But to be able to do this, allow yourselves to sit, allow yourselves to be. And with this, all the rest will come. Now we stop for lunch. After lunch, what we'll see, I'll just touch on this. I'd like to conclude these days explaining the basis in a very superficial way, but the kind of evolution, a kind of evolution of what we've seen so far of meditation techniques where we use not just our breath and concentration, but where we use also visualization and also movement. In particular, I want to explain the practice of self-healing given to us by Lama Michel Rinpoche. Just to, and then after having seen what we've seen, it'd be much easier to put all the pieces together.
me kutse rapten chi nam karatin le chokchur ge padang lo san tempe dreme sasum ki drove munsela taktu ne gyure chi kewa kunto yanda lamadang dralme cheki pela longche chi sadan lamge yente rabzone dorje change koban yurtoba sho nimo dele tsendele nime kuyan delek shin ninsen takto delek pe kuncho sumke chingelo kuncho sumke ngodrubo tsol kuncho sumke trashin
Have a good lunch. And we come back at 3:30, right? Okay. At 3:30. See you at 3:30.